Hey gamers, what's going on? Shah here, and today in this video we're actually going to be trying to attempt to predict the tier list for tanks in Mythic Plus for Season 4. That's kind of a mouthful, but it's something that I'm passionate about and I've been kind of thinking about a lot lately, especially with the Season 3 coming to a close and us losing some pretty powerful things like the relics, for example, the seasonal effects for Season 3. Encrypted provided a ton of benefit to both DPS, healers, as well as tanks alike. So today in this video, I want to try to see which tanks are going to be moving up the ladder, which tanks are going to be moving down the ladder, and which tanks I'm really most excited to play. There's a handful of contributing factors that I don't know if a ton of people have thought about, but I wanted to point out before I kind of go into why I'm going to justify some tanks moving up or down the tier list. Like I mentioned before already, we are going to be losing access to the relic, which, while sometimes in low pokes you don't often get, in higher keys it's almost mandatory to have cooldown reduction for both the tank for damage and for healing and defensive capabilities. We will also be losing access to the woe buff and haste buff from Vi, which wasn't often taken, but the woe buff also providing a 15% flat DR and the ability to kite fairly easily for some classes will be probably noticeable going into next tier. Another thing that we're going to be gaining access to is a new dungeon pool with new items that we haven't seen since previous expansions, and in pair with the current tier sets that we now have, some of these items are actually going to bolster some of the tanks that haven't been able to actually do these types of things before. These are going to include things like old trinkets, old equip items like cloaks and necklaces and rings, as well as cool weapon effects. The last thing that's going to mostly affect how tanks are going to perform is also just raw item level, as well as how the dungeons are laid out. Some tanks have a very expansive toolkit and provide a ton of utility for their group, and some don't really do that at all. I'm going to be taking all these into account, and I'm going to try to walk through my general thought process when making this list. Now again, this is going to be fairly subjective. I am using my experience and knowledge of the tanking roles, or the tanking role in itself, as well as my experience with the classes. But again, the tank balance this expansion, I can't reiterate this enough, has just been so fucking on point that no matter what tank you play, your group runs with, you're gonna probably find success in most keys. There are rank 1 tanks of every class, every spec, and it'd be dumb to like main swap unless you're really trying to go for something more than a rank 1 title. So with that out of the way, let's dive in. So as you'll notice, you'll see an S, A, B, and C tier. Now this is really to exemplify the fact that some tanks are going to be moving either up or down. So let's quickly go through what each of these mean. S tier is going to be what I think is going to be the most meta tank. I'm only probably going to put one tank in this spot, and it's going to be fun to kind of come back here and see. So this is going to be the tank that's going to provide the most damage, the most healing, the most utility for all of these dungeons. Pretty much just what tank is going to be the top dog. Now, the A tier is going to be the most probably competitive tank. It's going to be a tank that's similar to how Brewmaster is currently. It's going to be the tank that's going to be, if played well, can still provide a massive benefit. You're still going to see a majority of rank 1 players playing this class. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I think it's just like the not meta tank that's still really, really, really strong. You're then going to have the B and C tiers. Now, what this is supposed to show is which tanks are going to be moving up and down the ladder because of the loss of and the items that they will not be gaining compared to other tanks. I think the items that we're going to have access to going into next season, at least the speculated items, are going to have a pretty big impact on how tanks are going to perform. So before I get this is a long fucking setup. So really quickly, I am on Subcreation currently, and this is what the current tanking tier list looks like. We have Blood DK at the top in S, most tanks are in A tier, and then we have the Guardian Druid down in B. If we go through some of the other specific affixes, you're going to see like 2 competing top tanks here, as well as everything else in A tier. And this is information relative to where the other tanks are. You'll see warriors sometimes struggle with certain affixes, but some of these are from older weeks. So you're going to see a very good balance compared to if you look at like healers or DPS, where you're going to see a pretty drastic spread. So tanks are in a really good spot, but if we go off of this week's specifically affixes, this is what we're looking at. It is a Tuesday that I am recording this, so technically this is the week we should be looking at. But just for reference, we'll use this tier list set on a fortified bolstering encrypted week. All right, so I'm going to start with, I think, the prot paladin. I unfortunately think that prot paladin is going to suffer a bit, and it will probably be one of the weaker tanks we're going to see. Now, I might be completely wrong about this, and I should say that it will still be strong. Prot mains should not be worried at all. Losing from the encrypted affix being removed is going to put a pretty big damper on their ability to do both damage, healing, and absorption and holy power generation, since having meant that they can spam their holy power generating abilities faster, having access to Divine Toll and Ardent Defender on a much quicker cooldown, or having longer uptime of Ardent Defender. Paladins are already a class that really have to play perfectly when it comes to global usage, and prot paladins not having are now going to have less of that wiggle room to make a mistake. So because of this fact, I think they're going to fall a little bit on the... Now, something else when it comes to items from the new tiers, or the basically old tiers, I should say, is that they're not really gaining access to any trinkets or anything that they haven't been using already. A lot of prot paladins have already been using your scales, your shards, your codexes, and your like first sigils, which we're going to have access to some of those newer trinkets still, like codex and sigil, or Soleil's technique, secret technique, for example. But there's nothing new that's being added. So something I'll talk about in a bit is that Guardian Druids, Brewmaster Monks are going to have access to weapon effects that are actually really, really powerful, that synergize really well with the classes. And Paladin's not really gaining anything that's going to benefit them all that much. So I think Paladin is probably going to be one of the worst tanks that we're going to see, but it'll be interesting to come back and see how they shape up compared to other tanks. Also repping it in the C tier, I think we're going to have the Guardian Druid. Guardian Druid does have a few cool things that they're going to be gaining next tier. They're going to have things like Jotungeir from Sanctum of Domination, Destiny's Call, which is a polearm that actually has an on-use effect. It does share a cooldown with trinkets, but they typically would pair this with Incarnation, and they would have a massive haste, crit, mastery, and versatility boost during that Incarnation window, and it also lasts for 30 seconds, which is the same duration as Incarnation. A very powerful weapon effect that made Guardian Druids strong when they had access to that. With it being older content currently only available at 252, most Guardian Druids have swapped off of using that weapon. Going into next season, we can now actually target this item in Sanctum of Domination and have access to that trinket, as well as a higher item level Shard of Anhild, which will just bolster the defenses of the Guardian Druid. While their defenses are getting bolstered, I think they're going to still rep being one of the weakest tanks, mainly because they just lack defensives. The new affix isn't giving them much to go off of based on the bounties, because it's really just a secondary stat boost, which more than likely we're going to end up taking versatility anyways. Moving into the B tier, I think we're actually going to be seeing the Prot Warrior represent pretty well here. If you come back here, you'll actually see that Prot Warrior has been slowly moving up the ladder, and I think that's because it comes down to stat perfection as well as optimizing gameplay. The Prot Warrior is going to suffer a little bit because of the loss of They're not going to be able to have as much uptime on their shield block, as well as a ton of their other defensives like Shield Wall, Last Stand, Fleshcraft now being the common choice for warriors playing Necrolord. Not being able to have those as often as they could with the buff is going to hurt them, but with secondary stat buff increases as well as a huge highlight on physical damage and keys, I think we're going to actually see Prot Warriors in a pretty good spot. They're not gaining much when it comes to new items from like older raid tiers that were really powerful at the time, but I think with Prot Warriors moving into Season 4, I think they're going to be in a fairly good spot. Next, we have Vengeance Demon Hunter. Vengeance Demon Hunter is a very odd tank currently, because it plays this very unique gambler style build where you're fishing, or you're basically praying that you get Fell Devastation resets with their legendary that has synergy with their 4 set, which generates them more soul fragments, which in turn gives them cooldown reduction on their CDs, Immolation Aura, and Fell Devastation. So the name of the game for Demon Hunters currently is stay in meta as long as possible. Now, while does help with that, they're not solely dependent on that, and you can have close to 70, if not higher, % uptime without on Fell Devastation and Metamorphosis to accompany that. Demon Hunters are also going to be gaining Gruciform Vein-Ripper back as a weapon of choice for them, which just gives them a flat damage increase to targets that are currently slowed or CC'd, which is pretty common in Mythic Plus because most classes or some classes have slows and CCs baseline in their toolkit. Demon Hunter so far all season has been a pretty competitive tank, give or take. What's also really nice is they do bring that magical debuff for some of those classes like Warlock, Mages, Shamans, and even like things like Survival Hunter. Most of their damage is actually magical. So Demon Hunters have been pretty strong this tier. I think they might sit in a B tier spot because of the nerf to both Warlocks and Survival Hunters going into Season 4. But again, these are more relative. On Raider.io, or on Mythic Plus Subcreation, I'm sure you'll see actually most of these tanks still sitting in the A tier. All right, now this might be a little controversial, but I think in the A tier, we're going to actually have Blood Death Knight. And there's a handful of reasons for this. Blood Death Knights currently have access to most of their best in slot gear already, outside of the fact that they're going to just have a slightly higher item level. Blood Death Knights running Gavel from this raid tier. They're one of the only tanks that actually will be using a two-handed weapon, and the Gavel is actually insanely powerful. So if we jump over to Subcreation, we can actually see this on Subcreation. They're running this Gavel of the First Arbiter, which gives them crazy buffs and bonuses. Now, of course, it is possible to run without it. There are 31s and 30s being done without Gavel, but the Gavel, not only being a higher item level than most other weapons, the bonus that it provides is insane, both for AoE and single target damage. They're also currently running Codex of the First Techniques, which we already have access to. And you are seeing like Elegy and Soleil's Secret Technique being filled in those other slots. Now you are seeing a couple of old Warrior Souls, so yes, they're going to have access to some older trinkets, but they're not going to benefit much from other raid tiers. They're still going to run this kind of offensive damage build. The biggest thing that is going to happen going into Season 4 with the Blood Death Knight is that they're losing access to which had a pretty powerful synergy with their current tier set. And that's why they're so powerful, or one of the reasons they're so powerful, I should say. Blood Death Knights, their main objective is having as much uptime on their Dancing Rune weapon as possible. Now, while they can pretty much have high uptime without provided a pretty massive 30 seconds off every time you had an relic in a pull, which allowed them to continuously keep up the Dancing Rune weapon. DK's also benefited a pretty good amount from the Woe relic as well when it just comes to movement and the ability to kite, as well as a DR. We're not going to be seeing much of a loss in self-healing capabilities from the Blood Death Knight, but we're going to have to see them get a little bit more creative with their rune usage outside of Dancing Rune weapon, because their uptime will be reduced by a fair bit. And because of these, that's why I think the Blood DK is actually going to fall a little bit. I think you're still going to see a good bit of people playing the Blood DK. It's still in a really good spot. But I think the S tier spot is actually going to go to the Brewmaster Monk. Now, I think to really exemplify how strong I think Brewmasters are going to be next season, I think we need to jump to in-game so I can walk through some of the different gear options we're going to have. Now, Brewmaster has a lot of cool little trinkets that interact with the class quite nicely. And a lot of them are going to come from older raid tiers. So things like Jotungeir is a really powerful gear swap strategy, because in Mythic Plus, you're actually able to swap weapons. So what sometimes Brewmasters will do is they'll have this item equipped, they will use the effect, and then they will have a macro set up to quickly swap to other weapons. We're also going to have access to Cruciform Vein Ripper, which is extremely, extremely strong. Dual wielding these, or even having one of them, is going to be roughly a 3 to 6% damage increase. Because of secondary stat increases for the higher item level next season, we're actually going to be able to hit our crit and versatility caps, which will allow us to actually run weapons like this that don't provide any additional secondary stats. On top of that, we will also see probably a play again of the Reactive Defense Matrix, which was a super strong trinket from Sanctum of Domination. We're also going to be able to snag a higher Shard of Anhiled, which again is just a trinket that most tanks have been running pretty consistently, even at a budgeted lower item level. Moving away from the raid, we're also going to be seeing a lot of really cool little niche items pop back up, at least we can assume. So in Return to Karazhan, there is a really cool item called the Drape of Shame, and this increases the healing of your critical healing effects by 5%. Now we're going to assume that this cloak is actually going to be in effect. It currently requires level 49 or below. If this loot, hopefully this is in the loot table, and not only that, but it's also usable at max item level. This is going to provide a pretty big healing benefit to both Chi Wave, Expel Harm, and Gift of the Ox healing, since all of those can crit. What's also nice about the Drape of Shame is that it gives crit and versatility, which are our two most favored stats. And of course, it can probably also proc a tertiary as well. We also have the Choker of Barbed Rains. Now, more than likely we won't be running this, but it will also, taking damage has a chance to instantly deal physical damage to nearby enemies. This has a 1 second internal cooldown, and with the way that Stagger works, this is probably going to be an item that, if you can afford to drop a little bit of versatility off of your necklace or something, might be something that's going to be worth running. With all of those things combined, going into next season, as well as not affecting our CDs as much, compared to something like a Blood DK, which really relies on Dancing Rune Weapon, or a Guardian Druid, or a Prop Paladin that relies on like Divine Toll and Ardent Defender, we're looking really, really healthy on the Brewmaster Monk for next season. So we're back on the tier list, and that is going to conclude what I think the breakdown is going to be. Now, again, I do want to reiterate that all tanks are going to be strong. Any tank is going to be able to be pushing rank 1. Some tanks are going to lose a little bit going into this next tier compared to others. And again, this is like fairly subjective. The tier list more than likely will look similar to what we've already been seeing, something like this. But I think we're going to see a swap of the Blooded Knight and Brewmaster, and we're going to see Prop Paladin fall maybe a little bit more than it already has. But again, it more than likely will stay the same. I really just want to speculate about this because I've been trying to figure out which characters I'm going to continue to progress on going into next season. With the way that loot's going to work and the faded raids, it might be a little bit more difficult to keep multiple alts geared. So I've been looking to drop a few of my characters. But I'd love to hear what you guys think. Let me know in the comment section below if I got it right, if I got it wrong. And I think we're going to end up coming back to this after a few weeks of the Season 4 being out. And we'll reflect on if we were right or how horribly wrong we were. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you're staying happy, healthy, and I will catch you all in the next one. Take care.